Baseball is dead. Rest in peace. Breaking news. You know what that sound means. You know what that sound means. We have got movement. Kyle Tucker, you are a Chicago Cub. What? Kyle Tucker to the Chicago Cubs. And here is the package. Isaac Paredes, gone. Cam Smith, gone. Hayden Wesneski, gone. Those fellas will see their way to the Houston Astros. In return, the Chicago Cubs net outfielder Kyle Tucker. And Jay, you and I were sort of chit-chatting just before we came on, and you were frothing at the mouth, leaning over what I can only assume was a projected lineup for the Chicago Cubs. Now, I know there might be some question marks still looming with the lineup. It looks like they have the ability to match up in terms of right, left, really all the way down that lineup. But talk about what you think you see right now with left-hander Kyle Tucker, tremendous bat-to-ball skill, splits, really pick your poison, great against lefties and righties, slotting in right at the top of that lineup. What are your first initial thoughts, initial takeaways, Kyle Tucker, Chicago Cubs?
I mean, if I'm a Chicago Cubs fan, I could not be more excited about this acquisition. This, to me, is everything that we on this podcast, and I think the vast majority of Cubs fans, have been begging this team to do. And that's behave like a big market brand name team. And this is the sort of move that I think the Chicago Cubs, with the way that they're currently constructed and just the type of organization they are, should be in. This to me makes this is the equivalent of the Garrett Crochet trade for the Red Sox in a lot of ways, because it's a team going out and behaving the way that they should, identifying a high upside, high impact piece that fits the needs that they have. And while the Red Sox greater need was probably in the rotation, I think the Cubs correctly identified that their greater need is in the lineup. And everything about this lineup, I think, makes more sense now. And I think, if you were following the rumors or the reports about this deal as it was building, you heard Suzuki's name come up multiple times as a potential asset that was going to go back to Houston. I think it's a huge win for the Cubs, assuming that they settle, the DH outfield situation with Suzuki in some fashion, to have kept him in this deal, because I just think that the depth now between Tucker, Suzuki, Happ, Bellinger, Bush, and on down, it just makes a lot more sense. To me, I know a lot of baseball fans know this, but it's worth reiterating. Kyle Tucker is one of the 10 best, and I think that's a conservative number, one of the 10 best position players in all of baseball. That's the type of player that the Cubs are acquiring. I mean, if you look at what he was doing just last season at the time that he went down with his injury in early June, he was third in baseball in weighted runs created plus. The only people ahead of him were Judge and Soto. Okay, that was it. If you look at his age 24 to 27 run, the last 4 seasons, he's the 8th best outfielder in the wild card era by adjusted OPS. This is an elite baseball player. And I understand that there's some risk that we can talk about with the fact that he's in his walk year and there's no guarantee. It sounds like this is going to be a Soto situation, their equivalent of what the Yankees just went through. I understand that risk. I also think it's a risk that the Cubs in 2025 should be taking.
Joe, what does this do for the Cubs right now in the division? Because we're going to get to exactly what Jay just sort of alluded to. And do the Chicago Cubs have the ability to retain Kyle Tucker? Is this sort of get him in-house, woo him and court him for the year and show him maybe that he could be the centerpiece? We'll get there. But I think initially, because the divisions, both AL and NL in the middle of the country, seemingly are up for grabs year in and year out. Does this do anything to bolster the Chicago Cubs and their chances of being the lead horse out of the gate in the Central?
I mean, it's no secret. These teams are in the Midwest for a reason. They're Midwest,
Oh, Joseph.
That's some shit you would say, Dallas. Right?
That's why I love it. I love it, Joe. You don't even have any kids we know about. Great dad joke.
No, I think, but for sure, I mean, with this trade, I mean, the Cubs, I would guess they have to be the favorites now in that division. I think you'd have to put them over Milwaukee, especially now that they lose their closer.
Milwaukee just lost a stopper.
And I didn't even see who they got for that trade or if they're going to get anyone for him. But
nasty Nestor Cortez and a prospect
Nestor
named Caleb Durbin.
All right, so obviously Milwaukee has a good chance to be better than the Cubs this year. But I would say on paper, going into the season, the Cubs definitely just put themselves as the favorite because Jay Hay said why.
Well, yeah, and so now my question immediately was, if the Chicago Cubs are not making the splash with a Max Fried edition or a Corbin Burns edition yet, and who knows, maybe they're still in that market. I don't believe so. But does this now almost force the Cubs to have to entertain the notion of spending money here with Kyle Tucker? How do you go out and make a move and part ways with the prospects that you parted ways with and not have a plan to shore up Kyle Tucker for the foreseeable future?
Well, I mean, I don't even think it's so much of a plan. I just think it's, unless I'm misreading the reports, I think it's Kyle Tucker is going to take this to free agency. It's a matter of whether the team is willing to meet the price at whatever point that is. If he has an amazing season, maybe that price is $350 or $400 million. If he has a down season, then that opens up a lot of other questions about whether the Cubs didn't even entertain bringing him back. But that's for another time. To me, it is a interesting hypothetical question that we're eventually going to get an answer to, but there's nothing that the Cubs can do about it in the interim. Like the Cubs' all-time record for contracts is Jason Hayward's at, I believe, $184 million or $182 million. They would need to come closer to doubling that contract than they would equaling it in order to secure Kyle Tucker's services for the long term. So I get that we could be looking at a scenario much like what happened with the Yankees, where Kyle Tucker ends up walking at the end of the season because the Cubs are not the highest bidder. I still think, even with that risk baked in, that he's a high impact enough player, and the Cubs are well positioned enough in, as Joe said, the NL Central to make a push like this that is win now. And they do have the wherewithal, if it comes down to it, to be in the Kyle Tucker sweepstakes at the end of the season. So I think it's a wonderfully interesting test case for the Ricketts ownership on ultimate spending here down the line.
To me, it seems like a one and done, though, right? Like this seems like a one and done.
Well, Joe, that's why I'm posing the question, because with the prospects that you have parted ways with, we're talking about your top prospect, right? In Cam Smith, and from top? There, what's that?
He's their first round pick from 2020, like this past year, 14th overall pick.
Okay,
I mean, he's a dude. So if that's who you're parting ways with, and we were just having this conversation, Joe, last podcast about organizations maybe valuing and differing in how they value certain draft picks in certain slots, even though there's allotted slot money per these spots. So for the Cubs to say goodbye to their number one draft pick from just a year ago, and Wisniewski, who I think 28 games last year, 7 starts, has showed promise, maybe not a huge ton of upside in terms of like late inning bullpen presence, but I think a guy who's still showing you some positivity. So you part ways there for what you just said, Joe. Is this still just a one and done? So now it starts to, I mean, is this an overpay in terms of prospects because it's just a 1 year and Tucker's taking this to free agency? Is it worth it? And does that signify the Cubs saying, you know what? We're making this move now at the beginning of this season to position ourselves early. And should we need to, come July, we will pull the trigger again if we're in a spot maybe to either catch up and close a gap or to create separation. Because with the wild card situation the way it is, I think those two are very real scenarios for organizations teetering on whether or not they're in a spot to take the division or just sort of back into a wild card spot.
I also think, I mean, you're talking about the trade deadline or leading up to it as an opportunity to further supplement this team. It also offers them an opportunity where if the absolute worst case scenario plays out and the rest of the team is trash, or the Brewers or some team gets off to an incredible start like they did last year, then they could pivot and trade Kyle Tucker again prior to free agency. And while, it's fair to note that the acquiring team would only be getting, 40% of a season or 35% of a season instead of 100% of a season, you would also potentially have the froth of the trade deadline and lots of teams driving that price up. So it's possible they could recoup if in the worst case scenario, they're not in the position that they think they're going to be in relative to the playoffs.
Well, and think about what this does for any of those other potential suitors is there's probably a good chance. I mean, I would say there's a good chance that whoever gets him is not going to have to overpay. But I think the Cubs think, you know what, if that's the case and we can hold everybody else's feet to the fire, we extend the qualifying offer. He denies that. We get our pick. And I think the suitors probably think that same way.
I think it's also interesting from the Astros perspective. Like we sort of touched on how disappointing this current sequence of events is for the Astros in the last podcast, where it's Springer out the door, then it's Correa out the door, maybe Bregman out the door, and now it's definitely Justin Tucker out the door. And I saw Buster tweet and other people, but you know how strong of a hypothetical fit Isaac Paredes is at the Crawford boxes, given his pull rate and batted ball tendencies and all that sort of stuff. And I'm certainly not here to dispute those numbers because all of that stuff is true. I'm also wondering, like, who or what is Isaac Paredes too? Because there have been stretches where I think you could argue he looked like one of the more underrated players in all of baseball. And then there was the stretch for decent chunks of last season, and specifically with the Cubs, where he looked like one of the worst players in baseball and like went what seemed like weeks at a time without getting a hit. And I just wonder, like, he's younger than most people think. He's also an extreme player in a way that most people in baseball are not. Maybe his new park is a uniquely strong fit for him in a way that his previous stops were not. But and this isn't a criticism. It's just like he's a part of what the Astros are acquiring. And in theory, maybe they're viewing him as the Alex Bregman replacement now that they don't have to go out and pay Alex Bregman because they acquired a third baseman in the Kyle Tucker trade. I know Paredes has some versatility in that regard, but I just don't know. Like Cam Smith, okay, great. He's a first round pick. He crushed after getting drafted last year. That's all good. Like that's the type of prospect you want to target here. But what are these other pieces that the Astros are getting? Paredes obviously being the bigger one, but Wisniewski, it's not like he was some total nobody. The Cubs viewed him highly a couple of years ago.
So when I think about the Paredes situation, the Cam Smith situation, that's a nice segue into what does this mean for Alex Bregman as a Houston Astro? Joe, can Paredes get comfortable at first base? And with Kyle Tucker's departure, is this potentially Mr. Crane saying, Bregman, I want you and Breggy Bomb Salsa to retire an Astro. You're going nowhere. I just bought a chip company, keeping your ass at third base. I'm going to have to pay Yordan soon. And if Kyle Tucker's the dude that can net me prospects and get me to where I want to be without having to write that paycheck, because the paycheck between Kyle Tucker and Alex Bregman is going to be different. So if that's the case, is there any shot? Is there any shot, Joe, that happens?
I didn't think there was much of a shot Alex Bregman would come back no matter what. This seals the deal for sure. I mean, you got a third baseman and you got the prospect. They both play third base. You just got two third basemen.
Right.
And you already have Bregman, who's a Boris guy. And, you know, like this team just traded Kyle Tucker, even though they had him under control. Like the Astros run their team like just like the Braves do, where they don't want any of their players to get to free agency. If they're going to get to free agency, you let them go because they don't want to pay those big, costly contracts. This is what this trade is, basically. Like, we know we're not going to get Kyle Tucker once he's a free agent next year. We're not going to pay that much money. So let's just try to get something for him now, even though it's risky because you're missing out an entire year of Kyle Tucker, which would have been very nice for 2024.
I think, to Joe's point, I think the Astros have told us how they're going to behave. Like, I think I'm happy to have this clipped off and thrown in my face, but as it relates to the Bregman stuff, like, yeah, we can say that they traded Kyle Tucker because they didn't want to pay a $300 or $350 million contract, and I think in some ways you can get behind that. I mean, George Springer was an $80 million contract, or whatever it was, and Carlos Correa was a big number, but like they have balked at bringing most of these guys back. And Jose Altuve never reached free agency before they signed him to that extension. Yordan Alvarez never reached free agency before they signed him to that extension. So, like, maybe Bregman's market reaches a place where the Astros are the best option. But I just suspect that in the guys that they've let walk before and this trade specifically, I think there's not a lot of mystery to it to me. I feel like Bregman's gone.
And look, with what we know about how conversations have kind of gone publicly with the Red Sox and whether or not there's an agreement or disagreement on settling on talent and who you want to bring in and how much weight any one voice is going to carry in those conversations. I think a lot of folks, and Jake, correct me if I'm wrong, I think a lot of folks look at Alex Bregman shipping up to Boston as nothing but a positive light, nothing but something that brings a competitor that Alex Cora has talked about. This is something that would fill a need. There's a lot of things that would help Alex Bregman over in Houston, or excuse me, over in Boston, because you keep Raffy parked. You got your guy over it in the middle of there's just a lot to like about that.
This sucks, dude. If you like the Astros, like you basically just lost Bregman and Tucker in the same day. And
that's what it feels like.
Right? Like, and the team has been, it's like it's a tough place to complain because the team has been so good for the past decade. But like, that really sucks. And now they got to kind of have to get a new generation of talent, kind of like, dude, they honestly look kind of thin, which is crazy to say for the Astros.
Is this like, and granted, I think there's different layers and levels to the whole rebuild, complete tear down, retooling. There's different ways to phrase it based on the pieces that are moving and leaving. But when you look at these two players, and really right now it's just one in Kyle Tucker, but should you lose an Alex Bregman and Kyle Tucker, what does that signify? What message is that sending? Because we're talking about a division who seems like it's starting to get a little tighter, shoring itself up, and with a potential rebound in store for the Texas Rangers, there's nothing that just hands this division to the Astros. I know probably when we start our prediction pod, it's going to be tough to not have the Astros at the top of the list, but I think these two names right now impact that. So
how many wins is Kyle Tucker and Alex Bregman last year? Just in terms of WAR.
Yeah, I would say that was probably like 8 or 9 wins between the two of them.
So 8
wins. Tucker, when Tucker
that was a partial season for Tucker.
Yeah, when Tucker came back, he raked.
Oh yeah,
he raked the whole season, but he missed half the year. But that's 8 wins. Like if you take that to the Astros wouldn't even be in the playoffs last year without those 8 wins.
Yeah,
so I know we kind of assume that the Astros are going to be good every year. But now this is a real test because they're kind of playing it like, yo, we're the Astros. We can make fucking something out of nothing. We're basically the Tampa Bay Rays. Obviously, they have better players than the Tampa Bay Rays on paper. But the Astros were never a team that was like money-balling it up. They had stars who they, they're a smart organization, but they had big-name players, Bregman, Altuve, Jordan, Correa, Springer. All these guys were like big players who got a lot of money.
We're kind of dancing around the point. There has been a legitimate talent drain in Houston. It's not just, last year was 88 wins incidentally. It was, they've gone from 106 in 2022 in the World Series to 90 to 88. They won 100 plus games 3 straight years from 17 to 19. I'm not going to litigate how some of those wins happened, but they did win 100 plus games for 3 straight years, and they won 88 last year. Like, I think if you look at the best versions of the Astros over the last couple of years, it happens gradually, so maybe it's a little bit hard to remember, but these are unequivocally worse teams than the teams that were winning World Series or going to the World Series. And I realize they had somewhere, they had room to come down off of those types of teams, but pretending that it's just the same situation because it's the Astros or whatever, I think that it's just not. It's just not the same team. And I think it is, I feel like I'm maybe coming off as a little too ominous. I just don't feel great about the manner in which the Astros are going to be run moving forward relative to the expectations that they had set for themselves in the previous decade. Like, I just don't think, obviously it's impossible to run back that sort of era consecutively. Like, there's a reason why we were putting them up there with, the Braves of the 90s and stuff like that in terms of consecutive, division appearances and ALCS appearances. But like, you go back and look at, the 2017 World Series team or the 2022 World Series team, and you compare them to what the team is trotting out this coming season, not all that close, really.
It's honestly kind of fucking weird. Like, it's kind of weird what the Astros are doing. Like, 'cause now I heard on Twitter, right? Like, they're even thinking about trading Framber, Wasn't that a rumor that he's on the block?
I mean, if
Well,
that,
what's his con?
And
he's due up soon, right?
so now they're trying to flip guys, but they also gave Josh Hader like the biggest contract for a reliever ever just a year ago. They signed Altuve for a long deal, and
Framber's
he's
a free
old.
agent next year.
Yeah, so they're moneyballing it up hardcore, but they did spend a fuck ton of money on Josh Hader, which was kind of weird because he's a reliever, and that doesn't really seem like the Moneyball fucking sharp analytical thing to do.
Yeah, but I don't think that's who's running the team anymore. But like that's part of the point is like I know Lunau himself has been gone for a little while now, but like this is a completely different group of people and a completely different mindset.
Well, wasn't Hader signed last offseason, didn't he?
Right, I know. Under the current regime that's operating right now.
Well, and Hader
is what I'm saying.
Always remember too, like front offices, everybody's going to want a Josh Hader type, depending on what they're willing to spend at the deadline every year. So every year, that's a piece, regardless of what contract you signed him to, that you could potentially move every year.
Yeah,
Not saying that they're going to do that, but that's how you have to look at some of these. Like, especially early in the life of the contract, because it's not like Hader is in the final year or the second to last year of this deal. Like, this deal just was signed. And so it's a matter of the Astros going to have to eat a little something if that's the case, but they'll move him. But ultimately, if the rumors are true about Framber and they're even entertaining that with these two moves here, and again, we're sort of just already shipping Alex Bregman out of here and nothing's been done, nothing's official yet. But to lose a Tucker and a Bregman, hear the rumors of Framber, yeah, I think that signals a shift in approach.
But it's like a weird, like it seems like almost like a random rebuild. Like it kind of looks like weirdly like a rebuild when it doesn't seem like there would be any reason to even do that. Like
no, and I think it feels that way because we're so
something.
used to the Astros having the success that they've had in the division. And I think to Jay Hayes' point about them thinking that, okay, we're just going to roll the balls out there and we're just going to do what the Astros do. Well, you're not the Astros of the last decade. That's not who this group is right now. So I think, I think it'll be interesting.
Yeah. Last note I just wanted to say, and this is the perspective that I'm thinking of it now, is that the Astros traded Kyle Tucker to a team that we had been begging to spend the money that we think they should be spending and acting the way that we should be acting. The Cubs were the team that I'll just speak for myself, that I had been coming down on as let's be a real organization. And that's who the Astros moved him to. So I think like timelines, sliding doors, all that sort of stuff. But like, it's hard to convince me that the Cubs are closer to contention with Kyle Tucker than the Astros were with Kyle Tucker. Right. So they're making a calculated financial decision that the Cubs aren't even going to do. Like the Cubs are taking much more risk in that regard. So I don't know. I think this is going to be a hard come down for the Astros, even if it's filled with wins, 86 win seasons and 91 win seasons here and there. Like that's why the previous run was so legendary, especially when you're not going to supplement it with, $250 and $300 million contracts to keep these star players that you've developed or acquired.
I got a question for the panel, which is something I didn't think I'd ever say. Do you think now, after this trade, the Cubs are better than the Astros? Which team would you pick right now?
I think I would.
Cubs?
You taking the Cubs, Jay?
I think so. I think this is enough of a swing talent-wise. I mean, so what were the win totals last year?
Right
Astros
now,
won.
If we still have members of the rotation for the Astros and it's still Alex Bregman at third and I've still got Yordan Alvarez in that lineup.
But you don't have Bregman.
Oh, I don't have Bregman.
I mean, it's up to you. Like, do you honestly think, because right now Bregman's not on the team, but do you honestly think Bregman's coming back? If you do, then I guess you could pick the Astros. But right now he's not on the team.
Yeah, I think
they just traded for 2 third basemen.
If Bregman's there, I'm willing to stick with the Astros. If Bregman is gone, then it's absolutely the Cubs.
To Joey's question, 5 wins separated these two teams last year, and one of these teams was viewed as a potential World Series contender that unfortunately got knocked out early in the playoffs, and the other one was considered a massive, massive disappointment. 5 games. Kyle Tucker, in a healthy season is easily worth 5 wins.
Yeah.
Like that to me is the margin between these two teams is thinner or was shorter than I think the perception of their 2024 seasons would have initially led you to believe. And that's why I would lean towards answering Joey's question with the Cubs are currently better positioned.
I know, right? I feel like I'd probably take the Cubs too, which almost you feel kind of stupid even saying that. Like,
well, you feel like a prisoner of the moment a little bit, right? Saying like, oh, they're the team that just got the sexy players, so now I like them better. It is a direct subtraction from the other team that we're talking about, though, right? It's not like we're asking, are the Cubs better than the Brewers? We're asking, are they better than the team that just traded Kyle Tucker?
And because the Astros have just been there every year for a decade at this point, and they've also lost a lot of big players just like this, like, you know, with Springer and Correa, Verlander. Like it seems like every year they lose another guy. Next year, they're still just as good.
But I think that's the point, is they're not as good.
Yeah.
They're not as good, but I still think I take the Astros rotation. I still take the Astros bullpen.
I don't know. I'm looking at the rotation is interesting too, because Astros had crazy injuries last year. All these guys who you look at as like good pitchers for the Astros are coming off injuries. So there's like questions, you know, Christian Javier.
I just see questions offensively that I've never seen from this era of Astros baseball.
And that I think
and a lot of them.
Yeah. Like, that's where the majority of the opinion is going to land, is what this lineup looks like. But again, we got to wait and see where Alex Bregman lands. We don't have to spend a ton of time on the Devin Williams acquisition, but I think it is more than important enough to mention and discuss, because on the heels of shoring up part of their starting rotation, a la Max Fried, the Yankees go and get a stopper.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's interesting that the pivot from failing to bring back Juan Soto has basically been run prevention, right? And I think that makes a lot of sense given the assets that were available to this team to acquire via free agency or via trade. Obviously, on a performance basis, Devin Williams is as lights out of a regular season closer as has existed since he's been participating in baseball. Since 2020, 308 pitchers have thrown at least 200 innings, and Devin Williams' ERA is the second lowest. Only Emmanuel Clase's ERA is lower, and Williams is 1.70. So it doesn't get a whole lot lower than that. I mean, listen, the Yankees have a great bullpen. It feels like almost every season of my life. It feels like there is something organizationally there where they can trot out elite bullpens almost year in and year out. And they went and got the best readily available relief pitcher. And I'm trying not to put too much stock in the last time that I saw Devin Williams, because I don't think that's totally fair to him.
Well, he was telling everybody what was coming. That's all right.
Yeah. Well, hopefully that's not part of the 2025 package for the Yankees, is telling the batters what's coming. But obviously he slots in as their closer. Luke Weaver did a great job in that role down the stretch last season, but just some incredible depth in this or high end depth in this bullpen again. In terms of cost paid, I'm not going to pretend to be a Caleb Durbin expert, but it seems like he was the AFL breakout player of the year, more or less. And I think much like this to me is two teams behaving in exactly the way that they should behave. Maybe that's the way I should have started this, because the Yankees are the sort of team that should be acquiring a high-end rental reliever for prospect depth and a guy off the major league rotation or major league roster, Nestor Cortez, that I'm not sure had a real home here moving forward, and willingness to pay Devin Williams that 1 year closer salary. And this to me is as obvious of a trade for the Brewers as you could possibly draw up. We know they were not going to trade him, or they were not going to keep him. They were battling him over dollars in his contract earlier this offseason, or renegotiated, reconstructed his contract. So it would not surprise me if the Brewers are the long-term benefits of this trade. But I also think the short-term win add for the Yankees makes a lot of sense here.
Joseph, thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, the Yankees
have
to
do in the Bronx.
Shit, man. I mean, they used to call them the Bronx Bombers. It ain't like that anymore.
No,
they've totally switched to pitching. Like, if you look at I mean, it was an obvious trade, like Jay Hay said. It was so obvious that Devin Williams was going to get traded sooner or later. But yeah, the line, the with Max Fried and now with Devin Williams, they got a good starting staff. They got a great bullpen. Their lineup now looks weak, but
all that Jay, that's why when Jay said what he said, that was where I was going to go. Is in a free agent race where you miss out on the biggest offensive piece out there that's been available in a quarter century, they say. The instant pivot is now to, all right, we can't score runs, we will prevent them. We will keep the opponent from scoring runs ourselves then. If we can't score, nobody's going to score. So they go out and they lock up Max Fried, they lock up Devin Williams. With all that being said, does that still feel like they've done enough to continue to put themselves in the spot they want in this division? Is that enough offense as it sits right now to win this division?
I think you could debate the word enough. I think the Yankees, if they go into this season with this set of players and nobody else in the division makes a meaningful acquisition from what's happened right now, I think they are very well positioned to win the division or certainly compete at the top end of the division. I'm not going to pick them this second, but I think, like, okay, so the Red Sox have gotten better, but were markedly worse than the Yankees last season, right? So there's a gap to overcome there. Not saying it can't be done in one season, but Garrett Crochet by himself is not going to close that gap. The Orioles obviously were the primary competition for the Yankees in the division, and they have done nothing that is truly moving the needle. I know they signed Tyler O'Neill. That is a Anthony Santander replacement. That's not advancing the ball at all. So yeah, I think the Yankees are well positioned. Yes, the offense as currently stands is diminished from what it was last year, but that's true in the context of Yankees offenses. I'm actually not so certain that it's true in the context of other offenses that they're going to need to be competing against, because I think a lot of these question marks in the lineup right now are either A, players who were going to be essentially guaranteed opportunities in 2025, regardless of what Juan Soto did. So, like, to the extent that Jazz Chisholm and Giancarlo Stanton and what we saw from Austin Wells are question marks entering 2025, those guys were all playing in 2025 regardless. It's time to find out what Jason Dominguez is.
Yeah.
Or
my question
it's time to find out what Ben Rice is. Mm-hmm. And it's time to find out what Osvaldo Cabrera is. And the Yankees have proven time and again that if the left fielder or the first baseman or the third baseman are not performing adequately, they will go out and improve those positions in season. And I think it's okay if that's their general approach as it relates to some of these young players in the lineup that need time to show whether they are going to be first division contributors or whether they belong on a team like the Pirates or the Marlins for the rest of their careers. So I'm okay with it if they made another acquisition offensively. Obviously, that makes them better. But I think this is Devin Williams, Max Fried, I think is as close to a really successful pivot off of Juan Soto as you could possibly have expected.
I won't disagree with that last part of the statement. I do push back on the depth of this lineup and the depth of this team. And it's simply because if you have a projected lineup right now that has a third of the guys hitting under 200 with swing and miss and contact issue, like then I have questions. I have big questions.
Totally fair to have questions. I also have questions. I just don't think anybody in the division has pushed them to the degree that they need to be like panicky or nervous about the situation, because I can pull up the rosters of the Orioles and the Red Sox right now and say, I can poke holes there too. You know what I mean? And we all could. And certainly you could do that with the Rays and Blue Jays even more fervently. But like, yes, I have questions about the Yankees lineup. I just think it's a reasonable approach to maybe think that you're going to solve or answer some of these questions in season while you've solved and answered the pitching side, run prevention side during the offseason.
I think it comes down to Jazz and Dominguez. I think those are the two guys who actually have like a lot of upset side left potentially. Like I think Jazz and Dominguez could potentially both be all-stars, or also could potentially just be below average hitters. So I really think those are the two X factors. If those two players are actually really good, and are actually like Jazz has a lot of potential. Obviously, Dominguez, very young, a lot of potential. If they actually like break out this year, the Yankees will win the division easily. If not, they could have a terrible lineup. And you could see, like just 2 years ago, the Yankees didn't even make the playoffs with basically a very similar roster to last year, just without Juan Soto.
Yeah, I mean, if these guys that we just talked about can step up, if you get the Martians to blast off and enter the stratosphere that folks expected him to be in the minute he showed up, things look a little different. If Ben Rice and Osvaldo Cabrera,
but those guys aren't. I don't even know, like, if you could even say that. Like, how much upside does Ben Rice and Osvaldo Cabrera has been around forever? It seems like.
Yeah, I mean, I would say those guys are more likely. If I had to bet, I would say that those guys end up being second division players and probably not long-term Yankees. No. But I also think it's okay to figure that out, particularly with Ben Rice. Like, I think Cabrera is closer to having his, his string play out, maybe. Yeah,
he is who he is.
Yeah, but Ben Rice, I don't think we quite know. But just final point on the Yankees' level of security in the AL East. The guy just pulled up the Orioles rotation, and I know the Orioles lineup might be in better shape, top to bottom, than the Yankees is right now, or at least we can feel more upside built in there. But their rotation is Zach Eflin, Grayson Rodriguez, Dean Kramer, Albert Suarez, and Trevor Rogers. Like, you're serious? Wow. Like, that's what we're picking to win the AL East? I'm not
what
right now.
What the fuck happened to the Orioles, bro? We got this new owner. He's going to come in. Everything's different. They ain't done jack shit, dude. It's almost
like... They go get Corbin Burns.
I mean, hey, I wouldn't be surprised. Like, they have to do something. They have to do something. Like, it would just be ridiculous if the Orioles, with all this ownership change, the team's finally good again. Everyone's for cheap because they're all from the organization and they don't spend any money to get anybody. This is like the prime opportunity. Strike while the iron's hot. Everyone knows they need to get people and they haven't done anything. You could say the same thing about, but also the Red Sox and the Blue Jays too. Those are also two teams that like fan bases and the front, like there's always speculation, like they're about to make a move. They're going to get, we just don't really know what these in the AL East, what these teams are going to be on opening day. There's like a lot of time left, and they're all seem like they want to do stuff.
It's because you're right, Joe. It seems like they all want to do stuff, which means there is varied levels of interest all throughout this division.
Listen, man. We could be talking next week about a Red Sox team that includes a signed Alex Bregman and an acquired Logan Gilbert, right? Or something like that.
True.
Those are the sort of sequences where I might start shaking in my boots a little bit if I'm a New York Yankees fan, if the Red Sox respond in kind that way. Mm-hmm. But interesting sequence of events here.
I wouldn't be surprised. But also, not to go back and we just didn't talk about like the Isaac Paredes like park factor and how big that is. Like this guy's stats are like insane. Like the guy, I mean, we did a TikTok about this, so these stats are probably outdated when we posted this like last year during the middle of the season, but he hits fly balls like 50% of the time. He has like one of his exit velocity was like third percentile of like the worst exit velocity you could ever had, but it was like leading the league in home runs because the Rays had him specifically because the Rays left field line is like the shortest, easiest park to hit a home run to left field. It's like that's the reason why the Rays got him. And then he goes to the Cubs, who has like a long left field, and he was absolutely dog shit.
Yeah, and now he goes to the Crawford boxes.
But it's like, doesn't it seem when someone says, "Oh, he's gonna hit good in this park," like you got a player just because he's good in your ballpark, like that seems like kind of bullshit, right? Like, first of all, you only
not
play,
at all.
Well,
not
you only play half your games there, and then it's like if
Mo
you look
Vaughn,
down to
meet
it,
the monster.
Like, okay, Mo Vaughn, meet the monster. I'm not schooled in those splits, but I'm sure it was a sight to see.
So, Joe, I got your updated stats for you, okay? I got your updated stats. Bottom 10 in bat speed, second lowest average exit velocity in Major League Baseball, ahead of only Sal Frelick. He has the third highest average launch angle, behind only Varsho and Santander. And he has the third highest pull rate, behind only Hoskins and Carlos Santana. And he has an above average fly ball rate. But anyway, those are the points.
So he hits every ball he hits is a fly ball to left field, basically. Like if you look at his numbers with Tampa Bay, the 2 years he played in Tampa Bay, his expected slugging was like 150 points less than his actual slugging because he's hitting routine fly balls to left field that are leaving the park. And I don't know the numbers off the top of my head. He had like 19 home runs last year, 16 were with the Rays, and he got traded at the deadline. So it's like basically
he got 0 hits with the Cubs. It's
and
crazy.
3 home runs with the Cubs, 16 with the Rays.
Look, man, there's something to be said for guys who have the ability to go up to the plate and turn the strike zone into a 1-lane highway. Meaning, I don't care what you throw, I'm going to pull it, and I'm either going to not swing at it because I can't pull it, or if I swing at it and I hit it, I'm pulling it, and I'm going to pull it in the air. And there's something to be said for guys who have the ability to cut a swing down and shoot the ball the other way when the game kind of asks them to do that. This is sort of similar. I know what I do. I can get the ball in the air consistently to the pull side. And that's real. That's a real trait to have. Much like Luis Arias has the ability to scan and, for better or worse, put the ball in a general area to the left side or right side to second base. Individuals can go up to the plate and say, I'm going to pull a fly ball right now. That's what I need to do. Like a left-hander, guys on second and third, less than 2 outs, that's what a left-hander is trying to do. Go up and pull the ball to the pull side in the air. I need both these guys moving. So if Paredes has the skill set, which the numbers tell us, and that's something that's been attractive about him, you're a team who should be aware of that if you're the Red Sox.
No. Yeah, he can pull the ball. Every single one of his home runs last year, all 19 of them were to left field.
Or if you're the Astros, excuse me.
His park factors, if you look at like the expected home runs by park, is insane. Like it says last year specifically, if he played in Houston last year, the full season, he would have had 26 home runs playing in that ballpark. If he would have played in Baltimore, he would have had 6 home runs. It's 26 home runs compared to 6 home runs, just based on what stadium he's playing in. That's quite the discrepancy.
That is quite the discrepancy, Joe. Well, look for Isak to be dropping bombs in the Crawford boxes.
Don't call him Isaac.
No, Isak. He be socking dongs. All right, that's it. Big moves on the horizon. Let's see if by the next time we meet, scheduled meeting, we have any updates on where Corbin Burnes is going to be throwing baseballs.
Shit, man, we may be maybe we'll meet later today. Who knows?
Well, you sound like you had a scoop, Dal.
I'm here. I'm
hearing.
I'll tell you what I do have.
I'm hearing the Giants.
I was just
and the A's were the A's were in until the last moment. That's yep. Second biggest bidder on Corbin Burnes. That's right.
Ooh, how about that? Didn't want to talk about the A's nipping on the heels of Max Fried, huh?
Yeah, that's because it was proven to be utter bullshit.
Look, Jay. Look, I'm not sure that you're familiar with how to GM, okay? But that's GMing 101. Hey, we heard you guys were close.
My fantasy baseball resume would suggest I'm plenty familiar with it, baby. Don't worry about it.
Not close.
Don't worry about it. I could run some of these teams. Jay Hay for GM.
It's called not tipping a hand, Jay Hay. Not tipping a hand. But
right.
No, I'm sure the Red Sox
not issuing an offer.
Hated to hear that they were third in line for Max Fried. Tough tickets. Maybe you'll get Bregman. Anyways, we will see you next week, or maybe in 20 minutes. Who knows? Until then, wow.